I want to be careful about how I tell this. Not because I'm afraid of being disbelieved, I'm past that, but because I'm aware that the way I process information is part of the problem, and I don't want it to become part of the telling. I am a man who works in numbers. I have been an actuary for 14 years. I assess risk for a living. I build probability models for events that haven't happened yet. I am very, very good at my job. And I need you to understand that this skill, this specific, trained, professional capacity for evaluating the likelihood of outcomes, is the thing that has brought me to the place I'm in now, sitting in my kitchen at 1:40 in the morning, with every lock removed from my back door, waiting for something I cannot assign a probability to and cannot stop needing to witness. My name is not relevant. My son's name is Eli. He is 7. His mother's name was Darren. She died 11 months and 1 week ago. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosis to death was 19 weeks. She was 34. I can give you the actuarial profile of pancreatic cancer in women aged 30 to 35. I can tell you the 5-year survival rate, the median time from stage 4 diagnosis to death, the probability of metastasis by organ. I built the model 3 days after her diagnosis. I don't know why. I think because if I could hold the numbers would hold the shape of what was happening, and the shape would be bearable in a way that the thing itself was not. The numbers did hold the shape. Darren died within the median window. The model was accurate. I mention this because I want you to understand that accuracy has never once in my entire life made anything easier. It has only made things precise. Darren was Turkish, not in the way that gets mentioned casually at dinner parties. It did not. My grandmother was from Istanbul, Turkish. Her parents emigrated from a village in Tunceli province in 1986, and her childhood was conducted in 2 languages and 2 calendars and 2 sets of rules about what you do when someone dies. I knew the outlines. I attended her father's funeral in 2019 and observed the rituals, the washing, the prayers, the specific direction the body faced. I respected them the way I respect all structured systems, carefully from the outside, without pretending I was inside. Darren and I did not discuss what would happen when she died. I mean that literally. In 19 weeks, we did not once have a conversation about funeral preferences, religious observances, or what to tell Eli. I think I assumed we would. I think she assumed I would initiate. Neither of us did. She died on a Tuesday at 4:11 in the afternoon, and the last thing she said to me was about the electric bill. And I've spent 11 months carrying the specific weight of knowing that the last sentence my wife spoke was about a billing discrepancy with AEP Ohio, and that I could have said something else. And I didn't, because I thought there would be another sentence after that one. There wasn't. We buried her according to her parents' wishes. I deferred to them entirely. I don't say that with pride or resentment. I say it because it's true. I did not know what Darren would have wanted because I never asked, and her parents did know. And so I stood where they told me to stand and said what they told me to say and held Eli's hand, and afterward I drove home and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes because the house had a specific quality of silence that I had not yet learned to enter. Eli was 6 then. He is 7 now. He is a quiet child. He has always been quiet, not withdrawn, not troubled, just quiet in the way that some children are, where you can see them thinking but you cannot hear what the thinking contains. His teachers describe him as attentive and self-contained. His pediatrician says he is processing grief normally. I don't know what normally means in a clinical context for a 7-year-old whose mother died, and I suspect the pediatrician doesn't either. But the word was offered, and I accepted it because it was the only metric available. I did 11 days after Darren's funeral. I came downstairs at 5:30 in the morning, and the back door was open. Not ajar, not cracked. Fully open, swung inward against the kitchen wall, the way you'd open it if you were welcoming someone. The early morning air was coming in. It was April, still cold. And the kitchen was maybe 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. I closed the door. I locked it. I assumed I had forgotten to secure it the night before, which was plausible. I was forgetting things constantly in those weeks, losing hours, finding myself in rooms without remembering the transit. The next morning, the door was open again. I closed it, locked it, checked it before I went to bed. Checked it again at midnight when I got up to use the bathroom. It was closed and locked at midnight. At 5:15 a.m., it was open. By night, I want to describe the way it was open because this matters. It wasn't forced. There were no scratches on the frame, no sign of mechanical failure in the lock. The deadbolt was in the unlocked position. The door was open flat against the interior wall, as though someone standing inside the kitchen had turned the deadbolt, turned the knob, and pulled the door open with a deliberate, unhurried motion. The motion of someone who lives here. On the third morning, I found Eli. He was sitting on the kitchen floor, not in front of the door, beside it, against the cabinet under the sink, with his knees drawn up. He was wearing his pajamas. He was awake. He was calm. Not sleepy calm, alert calm, the way he looks when he is concentrating on something. On the floor just outside the threshold on the concrete step, there was a glass of water. No, it's one of our kitchen glasses. The small ones Darren bought at Target, the ones with the blue rim. It was full. It was placed precisely in the center of the step, the way you would place something if placement mattered. "Eli," I said, "what are you doing?" He looked at me. "Waiting," he said. "Waiting for what?" He didn't answer. Not in a defiant way. In the way that children don't answer when the answer is obvious to them and they don't understand why you're asking. I brought him back to bed. I poured the water out, I closed the door, I locked it. The next morning, door open, Eli on the floor, glass on the step. I am going to compress the next several weeks because the repetition is the point, not the variation. Every night between midnight and 5 a.m., I began checking at intervals. Eli got out of bed, went to the kitchen, opened the back door, filled a glass of water, placed it on the step outside, and sat beside the door. He was always calm. He was never distressed. When I asked him what he was doing, he said, "Waiting." When I asked him who he was waiting for, he said, "Mama." When I told him that Mama had died, he said, "I know." When I asked why he was leaving water for her, he said, "She's thirsty from walking." That last sentence, "she's thirsty from walking," is the sentence that eventually broke open everything else. But at the time, I heard it as a child's grief logic, magical thinking, normal according to the frameworks I'd read, children personify death, project continued needs onto the deceased, construct rituals to manage the incomprehensible. I'd read 4 books on childhood bereavement by that point. Every one of them described something close to what Eli was doing. I was not alarmed. I was sad. I was wrong not to be alarmed. Not because the behavior was dangerous, and it wasn't, But because I was so committed to classifying it that I didn't look at what he was actually doing. On the 5th week, I installed a chain lock on the back door. I put it high, well above Eli's reach. I didn't tell him. I just did it one afternoon while he was at school. That night at 3 a.m., I heard him in the kitchen. I came down. He was standing on a chair reaching for the chain. He couldn't reach it. He was crying. Not loudly, tlahak, in the way children cry when they are frustrated by something practical, the way they cry when they can't open a jar. Eli, I said, come down. I have to open it, he said. You don't have to open it. You come down. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that was not calm. It was urgency, not fear. Urgency. Daddy, she's outside. I looked at the door. The door was chained. The deadbolt was locked. I had installed the chain specifically to prevent this. But Eli was not looking at the chain. He was looking at the door itself, at the flat surface of it, the way you look at something you can see through. Nobody is outside, Eli. She is. She's been walking, and she's almost here, and I have to leave the water or she'll pass by. I carried him to bed. He didn't resist. He was asleep within minutes. In the morning, I checked the back step. There was no glass. The door was still chained. But there was water on the step. A small, round, evaporated ring where a glass had been. I spent the next 3 days telling myself it was condensation. Dew. Runoff from the gutter. I am an actuary. I build plausible models. I built one for the water ring, and it held for 3 days. And on the 4th day, I got on my hands and knees and looked at the ring, and it was exactly the diameter of the blue-rimmed Target glasses in my kitchen cabinet. And I counted the glasses, and there were 11, and we owned 12. And I could not find the 12th glass anywhere in the house. I need to explain what I did next because it reveals the kind of person I am, and the kind of person I am is the reason I'm sitting where I'm sitting tonight. I built a spreadsheet. I logged every incident. Date, time, door state, Eli's position, Eli's statements, glass presence, water ring presence, external temperature, wind speed, precipitation, which I tracked it for 4 weeks. The data was consistent, perfectly consistent. Every night between 2 and 3:30 a.m., the behavior occurred. On nights when I intervened and prevented the door from opening, the water ring appeared anyway. On nights when I did not intervene, the glass was on the step in the morning, always full, as though it had just been poured. I want to say something about the water. I tested it once. I don't mean I sent it to a lab. I mean that one morning, before I poured it out, I drank it. I don't know why. It was cold. Not refrigerator cold, ground temperature cold, the way well water feels. We don't have a well. Our water comes from Columbus Municipal Supply. I know what our water tastes like. This tasted different. Cleaner. Harder. Like water from somewhere else. The spreadsheet showed me what I already knew. The behavior was consistent, predictable, and not random. But it didn't show me what the behavior meant. For that, I needed context I didn't have. I called Darren's mother. This was not easy. Sevim and I have a functional relationship, not a warm one. She has never blamed me for anything, but I have always felt that my inability to participate in the Turkish and Alevi dimensions of Darren's life was a quietly noted deficit. She loves Eli. She is kind to me. But there is a fluency between us that has never existed, and I have never worked to build it because, if I am being honest, I treated that part of Darren's life the way I treat all things I cannot model. I acknowledged it and maintained a respectful distance. I called Savim and told her that Eli was leaving water outside the back door every night. I told her he said it was for his mother. I told her he said she was thirsty from walking. I asked if this meant anything. There was a silence that I initially interpreted as confusion. It was not confusion. How did he learn this? She said. Learn what? This practice. Who taught him? No one taught him. He just started doing it. Another silence. Longer. In our tradition, she said, when someone dies, their soul walks home. It walks from the place of death to the place where it was most loved. This can take time. The walk is long because the soul must cross every threshold it crossed in life, in reverse. During the walk, the family leaves water and keeps the door open so the soul can enter when it arrives. If the door is closed, the soul cannot come in. It waits outside. If it waits too long, it forgets why it was walking. She told me this calmly and precisely, the way someone describes a known procedure. How long does the walk take? I asked. 1 year, she said, from the day of death. Exactly 1 year. I did the math. I always do. The math. Darren died on April 3rd. 1 year from April 3rd is April 3rd. Eli started opening the door on April 14th, 11 days after the funeral, not 11 days after the death. I asked Sevim about the discrepancy. The walk begins when the body is in the ground, she said, not when the breath stops. Darren was buried on April 14th. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after Savim hung up. I want to describe what I was feeling, but I'm an actuary and what I was feeling had no model. So I'll describe what I was thinking instead. I was thinking, Eli has never been to Turkey. He does not speak Turkish. He has never attended an Alevi funeral. Sevim and Darren's father, who died in 2019, never discussed these practices in front of him. I asked Sevim this directly and she confirmed it. Darren herself was ambivalent about the traditions. She participated in family observances but did not practice independently, and she and I never discussed this specific ritual because I did not know it existed. My 7-year-old son, without instruction, without exposure, without any identifiable transmission pathway, began performing a mourning ritual from a tradition he has never encountered on the correct start date, using the correct elements for the correct stated purpose, which I can tell you the actuarial probability of a child independently replicating a culturally specific mourning practice with this degree of fidelity by coincidence. I ran the model. The number is not 0, but it is small enough that in any professional context, I would flag it as a data error and recheck the inputs. The inputs are correct. I have rechecked them 9 times. So I am left with 2 options. Either my son independently invented a ritual that exactly mirrors a tradition he has no access to, which is possible, but requires a coincidence so layered and precise that my professional training rejects it, or my son knows something about his mother's death and about what follows death that I do not understand and cannot model. I chose to do what I always do when I cannot model something. I gathered more data. I flew to Turkey. I don't want to over-describe this. I want to be efficient. I took a week of leave. Sevim's sister, who still lives in Tunceli province, agreed to speak with me. Her name is Haser. She is 71. She lives in a village that I will not name because it is small enough that naming it would identify her. Haser told me more about the practice. She told me that the door must be opened by someone who loved the dead person. She told me that the water must be placed, not poured, set deliberately on the threshold, in a vessel the dead person used in life. She told me that the person who opens the door must sit with it open, must be present, because the soul needs to be witnessed arriving. She told me that the practice is not symbolic. She said it carefully, watching my face. This is not a metaphor. The soul is walking. The water is for thirst. The door is a door. I asked her what happens if the door is kept closed for the whole year. She looked at me the way Sevim had been quiet on the phone, with a stillness that contained not uncertainty but restraint. She was deciding how much to tell me. The soul stays outside, she said. It stands where the door is. It can feel the house. It can feel the people inside. But it cannot enter. After the year, if it has not been admitted, it goes back to the place of death and stays there. And if the door is opened, if the full year is observed, the soul comes home. It enters the house, it rests, and then it leaves, not to the place of death, but forward to wherever souls go when they are finished. The home is the last stop, and the door is the release. What is the family experience when the soul arrives? Hazer thought about this. Nothing dramatic, she said. A warmth, a settling. The house feels different for a day, maybe two. Like someone has come home from a long trip and put down their bags. And then it's over. The walking is done. I flew home. The whole flight back, I sat with a legal pad and tried to build a model for what Hazer had described. And I couldn't, because there is no variable for soul in any actuarial table I've ever used, and I have used all of them. I got home on a Thursday. It was late, after 10. Eli was asleep. The babysitter, a graduate student named Priya, who lives 2 streets over, told me that Eli had been fine, calm. Normal bedtime. I checked the back door. It was locked. The chain was fastened. I went to bed. At 2:47 a.m., I woke up and went downstairs. The chain was unfastened. The deadbolt was unlocked. The door was open. Eli was on the kitchen floor, cross-legged, facing the open door. The blue-rimmed glass was on the step. Full. Cold. I stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, and I looked at my son, sitting on the floor in the dark with the door open and the glass on the step and the April air coming in. And for the first time, I did not close the door. I did not pick him up. I did not carry him to bed. I sat down next to him. We sat there for an hour. He didn't speak. I didn't speak. The street was empty. The air was cold. At some point, he leaned against my arm and closed his eyes, and I picked him up and carried him to bed and left the door open and the glass on the step. In the morning, the glass was empty. I want to be clear about this. The glass was not knocked over. It was not evaporated. It was April in Ohio, 42 degrees overnight. And a full glass of water does not evaporate in 6 hours at 42 degrees. The glass was upright, in the same position, dry on the inside as though it had been consumed. I refilled it that night. Eli and I sat together. In the morning, the glass was empty. This went on night after night. I removed the chain lock. I removed the deadbolt. I left the door unlocked and told Eli he did not need to get up anymore. I would open it before I went to sleep. He said okay, but he still got up. He said he needed to be there. I asked him why. So she knows which house, he said. And then, with a child's simple factual delivery, she's been gone a long time. She might not remember exactly. I need to describe what happened to me over the next several months because it is the part of this account that I am least equipped to narrate and most obligated to include. I began to feel something. I don't mean an emotion, I mean a presence. Not in the house, outside the house, beyond the open door in the backyard, at a distance that seemed to diminish very slowly, like something approaching on foot at a walking pace from very far away. I could not see it. I could not hear it. I could not measure it. I could only feel it the way you feel someone standing behind you in a room. A displacement in the air, a weight in the attention, a quality of being looked at that has no sensory correlate but is unmistakable. Every night it felt slightly closer. Anik, I want to say something about what this did to my ability to function. During the day, I went to work. I ran models. I attended meetings. I was, by every professional metric, performing normally. But underneath the performance, something had shifted. I was waiting. All day, every day, I was waiting for 2 a.m., for the kitchen, for the open door, for the feeling of something approaching across a distance I couldn't measure in units I didn't possess. I was waiting for my wife. I don't know that. I can't know that. I can't know that what I was feeling was Darren and not grief wearing Darren's shape. And I can't know that the glass was being drunk by a soul and not by evaporation I couldn't model. And I can't know that Eli's ritual was transmitted from a tradition he never learned, rather than independently generated by a grieving child's pattern-seeking mind. I cannot know any of this. I have tried to model it, and I cannot. But I can tell you what the open door felt like when I sat beside it. It felt like the last 19 weeks reversed. It felt like someone who had been leaving slowly was now coming back slowly at the same pace, along the same trajectory, and every night the distance closed by exactly the amount it had opened on the corresponding day of her illness. I am aware this is not rational. I am aware this is not defensible. I counted the days anyway. The rate matched. 19 weeks of dying. 19 weeks, somewhere in the middle of the year, reaching where the presence felt like it was crossing the distance that illness had opened. And then the 19 weeks ended, and the approach continued, and it was closer, and the nights got warmer, and the glass was empty every morning, and Eli stopped getting up because, he said, she knows the way now. It is March 18th. Darren died on April 3rd. She was buried on April 14th. If the year runs from burial, the year ends on April 14th. 27 days. I need to tell you what I am afraid of. I am not afraid that the ritual is real and that my wife's soul is walking home. If that is true, then in 27 days, something will arrive, and the house will feel warm, and then she will leave. Not back to the hospital, but forward to somewhere I can't follow. And it will be over. I am afraid that I have built the model wrong. I am afraid that I have taken a child's grief and an old woman's faith in my own loneliness and constructed a framework that feels like Darren coming home because I need her to come home, and that on April 14th, the door will be open and the glass will be full and nothing will happen. The air will be air. The glass will be water. The door will be a door. And I will have to close it and tell Eli that the year is over and Mama isn't coming. And I will have to watch his face when I say it. And I will have to carry that face for the rest of my life, alongside the electric bill and the last sentence, and every other thing I failed to hold while I still could. And I'm afraid of the opposite. I am afraid that it is real and that it works, and that on April 14th, my wife will walk through the door and I will feel her, and then she will leave again, for the last time permanently, forward. And I will know with certainty that she was here and that she is gone. And the knowing will be worse than the not knowing, because not knowing has a mercy in it that I have been living inside for 11 months, and I am not ready to leave it. I am afraid of both outcomes exactly equally. This is not something I've ever experienced before. In my profession, in my life, every decision I have ever made has been weighted. One option is more probable, one risk is more costly, one path has a better expected value. I have always been able to calculate the lean. I have always known which way to fall. I do not know which way to fall, so I am doing the only thing I know how to do. I am opening the door, I am filling the glass, where I am sitting on the kitchen floor with my son at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I am waiting. And I am not building a model because there is no model for this. Last night, March 17th, I sat alone. Eli had fallen asleep early and I didn't wake him. I opened the door, I placed the glass, I sat on the floor in the dark. At approximately 2:20 a.m., the air in the kitchen changed. I don't mean the temperature, although the temperature may have changed. I mean the quality, the texture, the way it sat against my skin. It felt the way our bedroom used to feel on Sunday mornings when Darren was still asleep and I was awake and the room was holding both of us. It felt attended to. It felt like being in a room with someone who is resting. And then it receded, gently, like a tide going back out. Not a departure, a continuation, like whatever it was had paused briefly and then kept walking. I checked the glass in the morning. Empty. 27 days. I don't know what I'm going to do on April 14th. I don't know if I'll sit on the floor or stand in the doorway or go to bed and leave the door open and the glass full and let whatever happens happen without the weight of my witnessing. I don't know if I will tell Eli it's the last night. I don't know if he already knows. I don't know if Darren, if the thing that is approaching, knows that I'm here now, that I'm sitting where Eli sat, that I am holding the door she needs. I don't know if I'm holding it for her or for me, but I know this. I spent 19 weeks watching my wife leave, and I said nothing that mattered. And the last words between us were about an electric bill. And I have been given, by my son, or by his grandmother, by a tradition I never entered and do not understand, the possibility that there are 27 nights left in which leaving can become arriving, and I will not close the door. I will not pour out the water. I cannot model what is coming, and I cannot calculate whether it will save me or finish me, and I am going to sit on this floor every night until April 14th. Because sitting on this floor in the dark with the door open is the closest thing to a true sentence I've said to my wife in over a year. The glass is on the step. The door is open. I have 27 days, weddings, and I don't know what's coming home. And I don't know if I'll survive the answer, and I am not closing the door.